Okay, so you can see where I am now in the process. And I'm going to show you the technique that I used to create these collage shapes. So keep in mind the background is lighter values on the spectrum of values. They're going to be values that are pretty much all on the 10 through 6 or 10 through 5 side of our value spectrum. So this side of our value spectrum, not this side. And then the collage elements are going to be this side of the value spectrum. And things that we want to be closer to us or call more attention to will be darker, more contrasting with the values on this side, and things that we want to be farther away or less visible will be closer to this side, so grayer. So for instance, these two bird shapes here, my brown pelicans, are much lower on this particular spectrum or side of the spectrum. We would say they're higher in value versus lower in value. Higher in value means lighter, lower in value means darker. The presence of light, the progressive absence of light. So I want to do two of the same sandcastle shapes here in the foreground. Now, one of the things I think that might be somewhat confusing about this is our inclination would be to say, oh, I want them to be black. But that may not necessarily be the case. Because these values are in this dark side of the spectrum, it's really from here up that we have this side of the spectrum. We could probably get away with the values down here being either very light or very dark. I have some white here, so I could maybe get away with white down here. So we're going to play. We're going to experiment and see which will work better, black or white. So I want sandcastles that are about this big. I want them to overlap these two shapes. Overlap helps to create space. It also helps to move the eye from one shape to the next shape by creating a connecting point between the two, or a bridge between the two. What I can do is I can use the size of my page, my sketchbook page, which is 9 by 12, as a scale finder. And the way that I can think about it is this page is the same size as my format, which is 9 by 12. So if I want that shape to be about this big, I need to cut it out of a shape that's approximately the same size. So if I was to do something like this, and make sure that my sandcastle fits within that shape, I'm going to have the right scale relative to the area that I want to have. So here I'm just cutting out that scale area. I folded it in half because I want two. Now, because I'm lazy, I like this because I can just draw it once and cut it out once, and I'll get exactly the same shape. So I'm going to pull out my reference. I looked online and I found a reference of a sandcastle, and I like it because it's very wobbly. I'm not going to include these items, the starfish, the cup, whatever that is at the top. I might include a starfish eventually. So first thing that I do is notice that it's a triangle. I'm making it slightly smaller than the shape. You can even kind of judge, okay, if I draw it within this boundary, is it going to fit over both areas? Yes, it will. Then I can start thinking about, okay, we've got this base, we've got a rectangle, and then we've got a square on top, and then another rectangle on top of that. So there's my primary shapes. Now I'm going to come in and start to refine and add secondary shapes. And then come in and add tertiary information. And you can be somewhat loose with this. I don't want that hole there. Because when I come in with my razor blade, I can cut it out and still be artistic with it. Meaning that instead of just doing a straight line, I can wobble my edge. I can make more of a transition into this base instead of just a right angle. I can make this longer instead of just having one movement. I can have two movements of contour. One thing you'll notice is as I'm doing this, I'm not just keeping it in one position and changing my hand position. I'm moving the page and keeping the same hand position. This is both safety and craft. Safety because I'm not, pulling towards my fingers or moving left to right, which can tend to put our fingers at risk. So that's danger, safety, right? And then craftsmanship is created by consistency. So if I'm consistent in the way that I cut, and I break up these cuts into multiple smaller cuts instead of one longer cut, trying to go around this complex contour with one fell swoop. I think I'm saving time, but I'm actually making life more difficult and less efficient for myself. You can also cut over the edge a little bit, meaning you have this line here, and instead of stopping at the corner, I can go over the corner. Because as long as I don't cut through the whole shape, when I glue it down, those little tiny cuts are not going to even be noticeable. I think the most frustrating thing is, did I cut in an area? It's not going to hurt you to cut again. So like these little cuts, I can overstep them a little bit. It's easier than trying to stop and start. So overstepping that line. It just enables you to get more detail more easily. So I could even cut from here all the way over to get that little crest. Now if your paper starts to tear, stop. Or if it starts to pull up the paper, stop and reorient to reduce friction. And you know, I can't give you one easy way of attacking it so that it doesn't pull the paper, because it's really dependent on what you're cutting. So you just have to be aware. That's the main thing, is focus and awareness and attentiveness. So for instance, what I could do is just cut straight across all of those crests and then come back. I don't know that that's, you know, possible until I'm here. And then I'm like, oh, that would be a possibility. And you know, the more you have waver in the contours, the more interesting the shape is going to be, especially with these organic shapes. Almost there with the contour of the shape. Now I can come in and cut out my internal details, tertiary information, secondary information. Make sure that your page, where it's folded, doesn't slide too much. In fact, sometimes I like to tape the page together so that it doesn't slide. Like that just happened, which is a perfect example of how if you don't tape your page together, it will slide. So I might go ahead and just take that out. I'm going to go ahead and put these back together. Since I didn't do this beforehand, I'm having to really try to make sure that these pages, or these individual elements, stay aligned, otherwise I'm going to have asymmetrical balance with the shapes. So I'm really having to press hard to keep them in line. Like that. Ugh. Okay, so I'm going to stop because I'm having issues. So if I take a little bit of tape and just press it on the shape and then stick those two shapes together, I should have less issue now. I love messing up for my students so that they can see me problem solve. And you know, the tape is under there, but if we're pressing hard enough, we can cut right through the tape. The main thing is that when we take the tape off, we don't want to rip. All right, last cut. You know, with these small cuts, I don't even have to move my razor blade. I can just press, because the razor blade is of a length that it'll cut without having to move it too much, if at all. Okay, so now I'm going to take these guys apart and hope for the best. Just go slow. Okay. I'm noticing that my big doorway is a little bit different from side to side. So I've got a cut there, it just didn't go all the way through. So we fine tune. Okay, now we've got our two shapes. Make sure that we're orienting them the same way. Like so. Now, this is just the white of the page. I kind of like them white because that's a pretty strong contrast down there. But they're pretty heavy visually. Like if I squint at the image, you know, these don't seem, even though they're white, too contrasting. Number one, because they're very large area. This is smaller and more concentrated. Number two, because it's adjacent to a light gray tone, whereas this is white adjacent to a darker gray, middle gray tone, so it stands out more. So I think I'm going to do maybe a very light gray on them, because I don't want them to stand out too much. I really want the eye to be drawn to the porpoises. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of black. And a little bit of white. I'm going to get my square brush, dampen it in the water. Now I'm going to take white. I want a lighter color. If you want a lighter color, always add dark to light. If you want a darker gray, then you would add a little bit of white to black. So I'm just going to take a little bit of black. The sky value is about a value 8. So value 8, that's much lighter. So a little bit more black. Make sure you're mixing it thoroughly. That's more of a 7, so a little bit of white. That looks good. So when you squint at it, that looks lighter, that looks darker, that blends in. Lighter, darker, it blends in. So now I'm going to take these little guys. It doesn't hurt to have a little piece of paper to do this on, and just dab, dab, dab. I like to sometimes use my razor blade to hold it in place. That way I don't get paint on my fingers and it doesn't move too much. And I can cover the whole surface because my finger's not in the way. Now, once you've covered the whole thing, you need to move it. You've got to move it, move it. Otherwise, it's going to stick to the paint that's underneath it. So, just take your razor blade, move it to the side. I also like to paint in a different area for the next one. Now, if I start to run out of paint, I can just mix some more of this color right next to it. And that way I'll be able to match. So that looks pretty similar. One second. Okay. Okay, so now we want to glue. Now, glue sticks are the easiest because they're kind of no muss, no fuss. But I'm going to use something called gloss medium, which is the same binder that's in your acrylic paint. So all paint is two things. It's pigment, which is the colorative agent, the hue. So here it's titanium dioxide mixed with acrylic polymer. That's the binder. So binder, pigment equal paint. Medium is binder alone. This is gloss medium, so it has a gloss finish. They also have matte. So this is what the pigments are suspended in. It's something that dries completely clear, so you can thin out your paints and make them more transparent. You can make them glossy by adding this a little bit or a lot, which will, as I just indicated, make them more transparent. And it can also be used as a glue and a unifying varnish at the end, which is what we're going to do eventually. But as I said, a glue stick is going to be easier when adhering these things. Now, before I adhere, I just want to see what it looks like. I like how it's contrasting here, but I feel like it's not contrasting enough here. So I'm going to repaint them. I'm going to make them a little bit lighter. Not white, but really close to white. So like a value 9. Because right now I'm what? At a value 7. So let's do a value 9. That way they'll have a little bit more visual weight relative to the area around them. So again, if I want it to be light, I add dark to it. Now what's cool about this is that because I have this previous paint right here, whatever I mix, as long as it's lighter, it's going to be in good shape. So again, we mix up the pigment. Again, we come over here. We use our razor to hold it. This is splotchy anyway, so I'm going to lighten these. You can see immediately that it's a good bit darker, or lighter, sorry, than my tone. And who knows, maybe I will have made this too light, but that's the advantage of placing it before you put it or glue it down. And with collage especially, it's nice because you can test it. And since this shape is small, it's not a big deal to repaint it. Again, oops, move it to the side. These dry really quick too, which is good because that means I can get these glued down. In short order. Okay, so I've lightened both of those. Move it. And this other one should be dry now, or close to it. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah. I shouldn't have painted that one. I should have showed you the difference. Interesting though, look at how it's contrasting with the paper here. It looks dark, but because here it's against a darker background, darker against lighter, lighter against a darker background. Same exact value. Watch, magic. Darker. Voila, it becomes lighter. All right, so I like that contrast. So now, clean off my brush of all the paint, blot it dry, grab some of my medium, or if you have a glue stick, use the glue stick. If you don't have medium at home while you're doing this, you can just use Elmer's glue. It dries clear as well. Brush it on. Make sure that it's completely covered, and it's very sticky almost immediately, so move it to the side. It doesn't hurt to just let it cure just a little bit. You don't want it to dry completely, but if it's not wet, that can sometimes make it easier to position. Now, I want to make sure I get these in exactly the same place, so I really have to pay attention to distance from the bottom and distance from the side of the page. And it just so happens that the top of this lines up with the top of that. I just noticed that this one is not overlapping those two segments, meaning the dark segment and this lighter segment, and I like it when I can see both. To me, that's more interesting. And then just kind of work from the center out to the edge, patting it softly. If it doesn't stick completely, you can just take a smaller brush and get it underneath the edge. But even if it doesn't stick completely, we can come back when we do our varnish layer, and it'll kind of sink under the edges and help it to glue down. So notice that this window has half and half, this window has half and half, this doesn't. So positioning this relative to that peak and this so that that line passes behind in the same way over here, well, I guess it wouldn't be exactly the same way, but similar. So about right. About right there. And if you want, you can make a little mark in at least two places so that you can line that up easily. So again, wash off your brush, blot it dry, grab some medium or glue or whatever it is you're using. Now if you use a brush with Elmer's glue, make sure you wash it before that. Well, in any adhesive like this that dries by air, you want to wash it off really quickly, otherwise it's going to ruin your brush. Paint it. Move it before it dries. I mean, it sticks really quick. Find those two pencil marks. There's one. There's the other. Work from center out. If you have any bubbles, just kind of push from center out. It looks a little high. So before it sticks, I'm going to lift it very carefully. Oh, so carefully. And then lay it down again. Now, if it dried already, I see a little bit of a rip here, so I'm going to take my X-Acto and just scrape that off. Yeah, we're already dry. There we go. Now, you'll notice that there's like shininess on it. Don't worry about that because we're going to do a varnish layer of the matte medium or the gloss medium over the whole shape, whole design, and that'll unify and get rid of all those glossy areas. Okay, I think I like it. Looks good.